I'm Tony Shepard, 30 years tracking organized retail crime and working major busts.
And I'm Johnny Custer, 30 years turning loss prevention into a profit-driving powerhouse with analytics and strategy.
Every episode, we break down the latest in retail risk, security, and total loss prevention. What's real, what's hype, and what's coming next.
And yeah, we'll probably have some fun along the way.
Welcome to It's Your Loss with Tony and Johnny. Retail crime, retail loss, the future of loss prevention.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Tony, good to see you, man.
Yeah, likewise.
So today we've got a industry legend with us. King Rogers has joined us straight out of sort of retirement. It's funny. I see that you're retired on your profile, but I keep seeing you interacting with all kinds of folks throughout the industry pretty regularly.
I like to keep my toe in the water.
Understood.
I don't think they'll let you out anyway, King. That's my guess. I have a feeling they reach out to you, so they suck you back in. So,
Godfather 3 style.
yes.
So King, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but when I first heard your name, before we actually met many years ago, I kept hearing King Rogers, the godfather of loss prevention, or the grandfather of loss prevention. Is that something you're familiar with? Is that something you've heard?
Yeah, from an age perspective, I probably prefer Godfather over grandfather.
I think to get started, obviously, King, to Johnny's point, obviously a lot of people have heard, even if they don't know who you are, they've heard your name, right? I know you've been in LP Magazine. I've heard, you say Godfather of loss prevention. I've heard Godfather of ORC as well, right? Like that's a common expression that I've heard in the industry. But if you wouldn't mind, for those that may not know you, those that are newer to the industry or just heard the name and they don't really know that much about you, just give us like a Reader's Digest version of your background in the retail LP space.
All right, I'll try to keep it concise, but Tony, that's difficult sometimes for me to do.
I know. I am. For me too, King. Just so we're clear.
So after college, I served in the military, and I was in Southeast Asia for a couple of years until the USS Pueblo was seized by the North Koreans, at which point, and by the way, this was during Tet of 1968, I was ordered to leave Vietnam and go to South Korea with a mission to get the ship and the sailors back. Well, the ship is still there. The sailors, all except for one, we were able to get back. And then I worked for NSA for a little while. And then I moved to Philadelphia, close to where my parents were, and got a job at a regional department store called Strawbridge and Clothier in those days. And I was in the executive management program and counted ties and socks in the men's department. That's my first assignment.
Nice.
And then I was made the assistant manager of the inventory shortage control department, which was an accounting function. I was a history major, so accounting was new to me. And I did that and then became the manager of that department, and then got into store operations and did some things there. And then I was called in by the head of HR, who said, "We'd like for you to transfer over to the Clover division," which was very much like a Target store being under the Dayton-Hudson corporate flag. But this was Clover being created by the Strawbridge and Clothier corporate flag. So I said, "Well, what did I do wrong?" And they said, "Nothing. In fact, we're going to give you an increase to prove to you that you didn't do anything wrong." I said, "Oh, well, okay." So
Never good when they're throwing money at you, though. Where are they sending you?
Hey, King. Sorry to interrupt, but what branch were you in, by the way?
I was in the Air Force.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I was in the Army myself. So yeah,
Well, thank you for your service, Tony.
likewise.
And so anyway, I did some things in the Clover division, and then they asked me to open up a new Clover store in Northeast Philadelphia. And I said, "Sure, I'll do that." And I did it, and it was relatively successful in spite of me. And then I got a call from the chairman of the executive committee who said, "We're going to create a new division. We're going to take store security, because that's what it was called in those days, internal audit, inventory shortage control, and risk management, and put them under one umbrella, which we're going to call assets protection, and we'd like for you to run that. I'm in. Absolutely. Then I got recruited by a headhunter, and she was recruiting for Target stores for a VP role. And she asked me if I'd be interested. And I said, well, I don't know where Target's located. And she said, they're in Minnesota. So I got my road atlas out and looked up Minnesota, because I had no clue as to where Minnesota was. And I'd been all over the world, just not to Minnesota at that point. So anyway, I interviewed, I got the job, and it was fun. Target was in a growth state at that time, and we had just purchased FedMart in California. And so we were opening stores in California. And I remember I was touring a store in Culver City, which is part of LA, kind of a rough part at times. And the store had just experienced turnover from construction to store operations, and store operations was stocking the store. And I went by the sporting goods department, and there was a young man who was uncrating shotguns. And this is an upper Midwest store,
Oh, yeah.
and we carried guns.
Oh, yeah. I
And
remember.
And so the head of that merchandising division happened to also be in the store at the same time, a guy named Roger Goudou. And I buttonholed him and I said, are you crazy? Why are we carrying guns in this store? And he said, well, because we carry guns in every store. I said, we are nuts to be stocking guns in this store. He issued the order right then and there to crate them back up and send them back to Minneapolis. But as I walked around the hardware department, I saw we had snow shovels.
Can we stop there just for a second? Because you mentioned a couple of interesting things I want to touch on real quick. So you entered Target as the VP.
Yes, I did.
Were you at a VP-ish level in the company you were at before when the recruiter was getting you, or were you just right place, right time?
Right place, right time. I was a director level.
Okay, well, that makes sense. And so you're a VP, and was this soon after you got hired that you had this conversation with the shotguns? Because I can't imagine, even at a director VP level, being able to make a decision about what we're going to carry and what we're not, to the point where at least they would respect me enough to recrate the shotguns and send them back. I mean, what was that like?
I didn't make the decision. I influenced the decision.
Fair.
And influenced the right merchant at the time. That was luck, again, Johnny, to your point. And he made the decision. And he knew that I was right in encouraging that we get those guns out of that store. I can't remember what he put in their place, but that wasn't my worry.
Yeah.
Kenny, I think that the word influence. I think my personal opinion is that in again, whatever title the company's using, right? And we've gone through loss prevention, asset protection, risk management, loss control, all these different things. But I feel as if obviously there's always some folks that are underneath that umbrella that work directly for like the pyramid head of that organization. But I do feel like, the ability to influence is just critical in the space, because in most cases, Johnny, to your point, you're not ultimately making those decisions, right? It's being able to influence others to make the right decision, right? Which, clearly you did in that case. That word, I know it's used a lot, but I don't think it can be used enough. I mean, I think it's extremely important. You and Johnny recall prior podcast with Chris Hamlin, where he was talking about, influencing the CFO and getting him on board what you want to do, et cetera. So great point.
Let me transition, if I may, to ORC. I did share, Johnny, with you a couple of things in my past about ORC. And one of the ORC experiences that I discovered at Strawbridge and Clothier was that we were missing large quantities of brand name clothing, like Tommy Hilfiger and Ralph Lauren and other types of high-end brand name stuff. So I just saw this group of people come into one of the suburban stores, and working together, they grabbed armloads of clothing off of rounds and stuffed them into large trash bags. And so you had a couple of stuffers, you had some lookouts and some distractors, and they were working as a team. So I got real curious and took a page from the FBI motto, which was follow the money. I decided, and again, we could get away with this in those days, to tell these guys, find out more about them. I was an
King,
old,
what year was this? Roundabout.
what?
What year? What year are we talking about? Roughly.
Probably 80, 81.
80, 81. You're already discovering and considering ORC. That's really interesting.
Okay, but it was somewhat restricted to that type of merchandise in that store environment. Anyway, I followed these guys up to Providence, Rhode Island. I could do that, as I said earlier, in those days. Can't do it anymore, but I did it then. And I learned that the leaders of these groups would meet at a diner in Providence, Rhode Island on Monday mornings and decide which ethnic contingent was going to go where that week in their theft assignments. And they did that because they didn't want the same people going back in the same stores week after week. They'd be too easily recognized. At least that's what they thought. So the Ecuadorians would be assigned to go this place, and Nicaraguans another place, and it was all based on country of origin as to where the gangs worked. Anyway, discovered that and got law enforcement to help. Law enforcement was very helpful for that. They were following these guys up and down the 95 corridor on the East Coast. It was pretty interesting because they would travel 10 miles from I-95 in either direction to hit the retailers within that 10-mile, 20-mile area. And so anyway, that was my first experience with organized retail theft at that point. So here I am in Target looking at out of stocks, and I'm over in health and beauty and sundries, that area, and I see empty peg hook after empty peg hook where batteries and film and merchandise like that should have been on the peg hooks, but the peg hooks were empty. And you check the store stock and it said that they had stock on hand, which they didn't. You check the back room, nothing there. And that's when I discovered, okay, it's organized retail theft in a different setting using different products. And the thieves were stealing the smaller items in bulk and then reselling them at flea markets in those days. That was before eBay and the other electronic internet-based.
King, you brought up an interesting point that I, made this argument. I remember having a discussion when I was at CVS years ago about, you mentioned the 95 corridor, right? And I think that in retail, a lot of companies would base their product protection strategies, obviously, off of the risk of the store, right? So like shrink results, different factors, right? Certainly. And that would determine what type of strategies they had for those locations. And I've always found that the problem with organized retail crime now, organized retail theft back then, was that these groups didn't follow that model, right? Like they were hitting stores that weren't high risk, but they were easily accessible, meaning like on and off the freeway, easily to get in and out, et cetera. And so it kind of changed that dynamic. I remember having a very heated debate with someone at CVS that handled product protection, trying to get them to understand that you can't just look at that. When you're looking at things that are going to protect from these groups versus like your lower level inner city, bad actor, right? It's not the same. And so if you're putting product protection on things that we know are obviously impacted by organized retail crime, you got to look at other factors, not just the risk of the store, which it's interesting. Like you're saying, this is early on, right? This is what it was still called organized retail theft, and you already understood that. But I still think sometimes, even in the industry today, that's some companies, are still kind of basing off of, other factors and not kind of looking at the fact that organized retail crime is a little bit different, that it's not always going to be in those tougher markets. It's just the convenience.
A great point, Tony. As a matter of fact, that reminds me that I developed a matrix and I listed all the stores on the vertical column in the matrix and then risk factors across the top. And shrink was not part of the risk factor. And the reason it was not was because shrink is controllable to a certain extent. It is manageable. And if shrink is high in a relatively low risk store, it's because that store is not being run properly. So I didn't include shrink as a factor. But the primary base for the risk assignment was I used data from Cap Index, and I ordered maps for every single location at Target, which was an expensive order, but I wanted to be able to see, to your point, Tony, is that store located on a thoroughfare between two high-risk locations, even though that store might be in a lower risk place. Because of that thoroughfare, it's like water seeks the path of least resistance, and that store was going to be vulnerable then. So I put in other factors, and then I used that matrix to guide resource allocation, including human resource and technology resource. And so the stores that were rated to be the highest risk got more human and technology resources than those that were not in that category. And it worked out very well, but trying to explain to senior management why shrink was not on the matrix was fun, but it was educational too for them.
You know, King, you can walk into most retailers now and you're going to have that same conversation and that same argument.
Yeah, you're right.
Right? I mean, I have to address something real quick, just to discuss how siloed we were as an industry. I started in the early 90s. We heard about professional shoplifters and we heard about amateur shoplifters. The professional shoplifters, they would come in, they'd light half your store on fire and then the other half would run out. That's all we were taught about organized retail crime. I didn't hear the term ORC or ORT until probably the mid-aughts, 2004, 2005, somewhere in there. Now, you were kind enough to send me the original loss prevention magazine, which I remember getting, but of course I don't remember all the material. And on here, you've written a great piece on organized retail theft. This is 2001. And what's frustrating is listening to you talk, King, and you were aware and already on top of these issues going back to the 1980s, which means that most other companies, because we didn't talk to each other, we didn't have an internet, right? We weren't anywhere near on the same level that you were. We had no comprehensive understanding of what was actually happening with all of this product. And I wish that there was a mechanism, and I think LP Magazine was probably the first step in that direction.
Yep,
but there was some kind of mechanism where we could have learned this from you and taken that to our own organization and done something with it. And it's really frustrating that we missed out on so many opportunities there.
Yeah, I know, Johnny, that, well, King, I think you know, John and I both worked at CVS, right?
Yes.
At different periods of time. And I actually was not familiar with organized retail theft, organized retail crime until I moved with CVS down to Houston, which was not until 2004. And I remember this because I remember doing a training session with store managers and they were talking about how bad the shoplifting was. And I'm like, guys, it can't be that bad. I just transferred from Detroit, right? I mean, like I was implying we're exaggerating, right? Because I had not even in Detroit. And again, Detroit obviously has, some challenges, right? An urban environment, a lot of external theft, but not organized retail theft, organized retail crime, because it's not convenient to go to stores in Detroit to commit that type of theft, right? So I hadn't seen it. And so then I started watching some of these videos and, obviously 2004, right? So we had more cameras certainly back then, not as many as we do now, but we did have more. And I'm watching these videos, I'm like, I was completely caught off guard. Like, to your point, Johnny, it had never been discussed before. I wasn't aware of what it was. And then I was like, wow, these I had to actually, acknowledge to this group of store managers, like, several weeks later that, wow, they were right. I mean, that was very eye-opening for me. And I never, to your point, Johnny, ever had heard that or been taught that or was aware of that. So
thanks for letting us know the first 10, 15 years of our careers was wasted, King, and we appreciate that.
Was Jim Lynch with CVS when you guys were there?
Yes, he was there when I was there. He actually was when I went into ORC. He was my boss. He's
Okay.
actually the one that
Well,
hired
I
me
used
to
to
run the
kid
ORC team.
Jim a lot about. So you were a Rhode Island state trooper, huh? I said, did you used to patrol I-95, state of Rhode Island? And how many trips from border to border did you make in one day patrolling I-95 in the state of Rhode Island?
Hey, King. So obviously, again, and shame on me, by the way. I think Stephanie Hoover's going to give me a hard time because I just acknowledged that back in 2004, I clearly must not have been reading LP magazine because I don't remember that article. And I should have been, or I would have heard some about this, right? I would have known some of it. So I apologize, Stephanie, for that. But King, you talked about earlier about, things that you guys did back then versus things that, you can do and can't do now. And I know that, I remember when I was out, doing surveillance, right, as an example, and there were some companies that could do it and some companies couldn't do it. And there was restrictions on what you could do and couldn't do. Like this company could do a trash pull, this company couldn't do like there's always, variations or whatever. But I'm just curious as to, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but early in your career, when they were creating these departments, right, assets protection or loss prevention, and I know even when I was early in my career, John, and maybe for you as well, I feel like staffing wise, there was a lot of people. Like, I remember having early on, right, large teams. Like I worked for Bloomingdale's for a while, and I think I had 7 full-time store detectives for like one building, right? It was a pretty big building, granted, but again, one building, and obviously that's not the case now. I'm just curious, and I know you've been, out of full-time work, to Johnny's point, but what are your thoughts on the changes that have been made, and just curious, as to your take on those and how we've evolved the industry, good, bad, or indifferent, right? I mean, things have changed. I'm just curious as to your thoughts.
One of the things that deeply disturbs me, Tony, is that it seems to be okay in a lot of retailers to take somebody who is doing okay, I guess, in some store operations position and moving them over into assets protection to run that division, even though they know nothing about the legalities involved in assets protection and, that really what it's all about. But it's supposed to be a good career path for somebody from operations to make that transition. I think it is, but you need an assets protection leader, in my opinion, who really understands assets protection and all of its nuances, the legalities, the HR portion. When I had responsibility for assets protection at Target Corporation, I was responsible for all the negative line items on the P&L. So I had bad checks. Checks was a very large portion of our tender process at that point. I had responsibility for bad credit. I had responsibility for safety, anything that was a negative line item on the P&L. But that went beyond shrink, although the shrink number was the highest rated number on my performance review. So I was constantly in the stores trying to educate, and I'll get back to education in a minute, but trying to educate and listen to people who are working in the stores day in and day out. Education is a 360-degree mission. I've got to educate the people at the top of the organization, the people at the sides of the organization, sides from me, as well as the people below me in the organization. The message has to be consistent, and it's got to be the same thing. Otherwise, senior management has different expectations for what you and your team are actually doing. So senior management has to be educated. And consequently, let's go back to the conversation, Tony, we had about influencing. If I wanted to present a proposal for approval to the budget review committee, let's say I wanted to spend a couple of $1 million on technology. Well, if I walked into the budget review committee without having made the walkarounds to influence people's decisions before, I was shooting myself in the foot. And so I'd make the rounds and make sure that everybody on that committee understood what it was I was pushing for and why, and I would try to get their approval in that initial meeting.
Can we? This is great stuff, King, because this is still an issue that everybody has today, especially with what the cool kids today are calling that total retail loss mindset. We've always been under the impression that there is more to shrink than just the theft aspect, right? There's all of these operational dysfunctions and all of that kind of stuff. When you were having these conversations to influence these different key players, was it the same conversation for all of them, or did you have to customize what you knew was each person's individual pain point, or what would kind of get their attention?
You always play to your audience, Johnny. And so I did customize it specifically to their functional responsibilities. And in spite of that, there were guys who, when I would go into the budget review committee and make my pitch, they would be snipers hiding in the bushes. And they'd start firing away. And I would watch Bob Ulrich, the CEO, begin to get a little smile on his face because he knew I'd already gone around and had done what I had done. I couldn't resist saying, well, Steve, you didn't bring that up when we met before. And everybody would laugh, just like you just did, Tony, because they knew I had already made the rounds. And Steve was just showing off for the rest of the committee members as, he's a cool sniper.
Hey, King, you were mentioning a little while ago about operations folks in senior leadership roles in loss prevention or asset protection. And it is, it is fairly common, right? It's not unusual. I actually, coincidentally, just did a post. I think you read it, Johnny, on LinkedIn about are we losing our investigative advantage? Like I feel like, as LPAP practitioners, that, we should be business minded. We should be looking at all those things, right? Total retail loss, even though Johnny doesn't give me credit, right? But I do look at the big picture. However, I do think that the investigative skill set is what sets us apart from others in the organization, right? And so I have concerns that as an industry, we've shifted so much towards operations that we've lost a little bit of that. I think that we probably need to do more, in training in that regard. And I know there's different organizations out there that do that. There's LP Foundation that has different certifications. You've got Wicklander doing the interview training. I know some companies do it pretty well, but I just, you have less people, and then you have a lot of folks focused on operations, but again, you still need that. Like, can you imagine that you've got an AP person who walks in a store? There is something like just, blatantly going on that all three of us on this call, right? Your spidey senses would go off because this happened, or you're looking at this and you just get that vibe. Like you just know something's not right. And so you're curious. So therefore you're going to go and King right now with technology, right? You're going to go and you're going to look at, Johnny, you're going to look at exception-based reporting, right? You're going to look at a lot of other things because you just know something's not right. And you're going to uncover in some cases like significant issues. And I think that in some cases, we've lost that a little bit. And I'm just being frank. And again, you can have it on the podcast because I put it on LinkedIn. I mean, this is just my opinion, but I feel like we've lost that a little bit. And I think, with the senior leaders, King, I think that sometimes can work out, provided that they have very strong leadership around them, right? Like you could have somebody in operations that takes over that role, but they've got to have like senior directors or directors that are very, very LPAP, that's their background in order for that to be successful. If you don't, you're in for a world of hurt, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree with you more, Tony, except that I'm not sure we have lost just a little bit of the investigative edge. I'm afraid we have lost quite a bit of it. And it's so important these days with all of the advances in technology. One of the traits that I believe is important for somebody to be successful in assets protection is curiosity. And you used the term earlier. You need to be curious about everything and how to satisfy that curiosity. How far do you have to dig deeply and widely in order to get the answers that you're looking for?
That's a great sound clip right there.
I can't mute the dogs, guys. I'm sorry.
They're
I
part of
can't.
the show at this point, King.
Hey, fortunately, my kids are not home, so we won't have any visitors walking in on the podcast this time.
Hey guys, I gotta ask a question, and I've been meaning to ask this with other, and I don't want to say old timers, but we're all old timers here, right? You were talking about curiosity, and this is pre-technology, right? We all had a thing where if we walked into a store, there would be something in that store that you would always pay attention to that would tell you whether or not it was a high shrink store. For me, if I walked by a service desk and that service desk looked disorganized, I just knew. It's a mess. My old boss used to tell me that he would call the store, and every ring it took them to pick up the phone was another percentage or basis point of shrink. Did you guys have something like that that was pretty consistent for you?
I still walk into a store today. I do the grocery shopping because I like going into stores.
Me too.
That's what I've been doing all my life. And to your point, Johnny, you see something that just does not work. There's a cashier in the local grocery store. I'm going to catch that dude one day because I know he's stealing them blind. I can't help it.
Yeah,
Hey, King, what would you want as far as folks getting in the business now, right? I mean, you mentioned, LP Magazine, right? I mentioned the certification, things of that nature, but what advice would you give folks that are new to the industry? They're just coming in, they're brand new. Maybe maybe they went to school for criminal justice. They're coming into AP or LP. Maybe maybe they're somebody in operations and they want to make the switch to LP AP.
yeah, King. Actually, I'm sorry, Tony. I like where you're going. I'd like to know if it's different, if it's somebody that is coming completely green into retail, or that example that King gave earlier with an operator who's suddenly been forced into or asked to join the AP team. Is it different? And what is your advice? That kind of thing.
Well, it is different. My advice is for anybody interested in pursuing a career in assets protection to become as knowledgeable about as many things as you possibly can. For example, you may not be a sports fan, but some of the people that you're going to be influencing to the sides, to the top, to the bottom, they might be sports fans. And you have to be able to converse with them, maybe not deeply, but at least have an idea of who won yesterday's game so that you can use that as a way to talk to them. I mentioned earlier about curiosity and books. I read fiction, I read history, I read management books, not as much as I used to, but I still want to find out what it is that young executives are being told so that I can at least talk with some degree of knowledge about that sort of thing with them. If you spend a lot of time reading very diverse subject matter, then you're preparing yourself to be able to talk at least to some extent with anybody about anything, which is always helpful. But more important than being able to talk to them about anything is being able to listen to them. When I'd go to the store, I would find the HR person there. And I'd find out what the HR person is doing. Where are you trying to staff where you're having problems? Which, by the way, the answer could very well have something to do with their shrink at the time. So it gives you the opportunity to maybe deliver a couple of nuggets to them about some of the traits that they should be looking for to fill those positions. Anyway, getting into the stores is extremely important. You guys remember Brad Brecky, who was my successor at Target. Brad was really good when he understood how much resources we apply to the stores, but lack applying resources to the supply chain before the stores. That is a very vulnerable area for retailers, the entire supply chain, particularly the distribution centers. But it starts all the way at the point of manufacture with the goods. And that could be somewhere overseas. But you got to know what's ordered, what's received, what's missing. We were one of the first retailers to ever do cargo theft investigations. And we found covert cargo trackers that we would hide in the cargo. And we were having problems with trailer thefts in Southern California. And I had one of the district assets protection managers equipped with a laptop that was able to actually monitor the location of the cargo. And he was talking to California Highway Patrol as he was following a stolen trailer that was a loaded trailer that had been stolen by a pirate tractor from a store and was headed south on the 5. And so he was talking to Highway Patrol, and they said, "How do you know this?" And he said,
Yeah.
"Because I'm tracking it, and I can't stop this guy by myself."
You know, I love the fact that technology is making itself available to the industry so that now we're getting to the point where we can start tracking product from the time the organization takes ownership of it, all the way through all of its adventures through the supply chain, through the logistics process, through the back door of the store, through the sales floor, all the way until it goes into the customer's hands through POS. And I think
And
until
Johnny,
you have,
what do we call that whole tracking process? It's
well,
called
I know what we
intelligence.
call it. We call it insights, but I'm not sure
Well,
what you were thinking.
it's intelligence. You are collecting intelligence. Intelligence is nothing more than data that has been collected, that has then been analyzed to convert the data into intelligence. And that's what I did at NSA. Intelligence is nothing more than information for action.
Love
So
that.
once you get the information, you've got to act upon it. And that's where, Tony, to your earlier point, that's where good investigators are very important, to be able to act on that intelligence. And I'm pleased to see more and more that assets protection is being driven, successful assets protection is being driven by successful use of intelligence.
Yeah, I agree.
Hey, before we wrap up, again, a couple of things. One, you're answering some of the questions I was going to ask already. I appreciate that, as far as some of the things that keep you busy now and what you like to do. And I'm envious, because I would love to have property like that. By the way, side note, my family, we go to a ranch at least once a year, and it's just the most fun that we have, most fun the kids have. We've gone to Disney World and the ranch in the same summer, and all of the kids by far prefer the ranch over Disney World, to put in perspective, which, by the way,
Sure.
Disney World is certainly more
Dad
expensive.
prefers the ranch too, I bet.
Absolutely.
Exactly. We didn't always have cameras. And I said earlier, the few cameras that we had looked like 105 millimeter howitzers. So I had a suspect sales cashier that I needed to catch in the act. And so I climbed up into the ceiling, and I poked a hole in the so that I could put my eyeball over the hole. And of course, it's a return air plenum, and the wind is blowing against my eyeball, drying it out. But I've got planks up there that I'm trying to distribute my weight on to get across to where that cashier wrap stand is. And I'm watching this suspect taking money and folding it surreptitiously up and sticking it in his pocket. And I got so excited, fell out of the ceiling.
No.
And I crashed to the floor right beside the wrap stand, scared out of this guy and out of myself too. And so that answers your question, Tony. That's the most embarrassing moment in my.
That's a good one.
Is
King.
amazing, because we've all had the fear, right? We've all crawled through the ceiling tiles, putting the pinholes in and doing all. I have been terrified of falling through or having someone see me, let alone dropping. That's amazing.
I think you guys are doing one hell of a great job. It is, what you're doing is so needed and necessary in today's industry. And congratulations, keep it up. If I were younger, I'd turn 81 day after tomorrow. And if I were younger, I'd be knocking on your door.
King, thank you so much. It's been an honor, really tremendous. The information that you shared just in our brief time together, I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of great things from it. But listen, we're here anytime you want to talk. We are more than willing to have you on and get some more wisdom from you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have
Appreciate
a great
it.
day. You too.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for listening to It's Your Loss, where we explore the strategies, stories, and data driving the future of loss prevention. This podcast is brought to you by ThinkLP, powering loss prevention for over 200 leading retailers and helping protect people and profits around the world. If you got value from today's episode, make sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube so you never miss an update. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow Tony Shepard and Johnny Custer on LinkedIn for more insights, stories from the field, and industry updates between episodes. We'll be back soon with more news, more strategy, and yes, probably another crazy loss prevention story or two. Until then, keep protecting people, securing profits, and try not to let it be your loss.